All right, we're gonna start with I took off the jacket, the Dale Carnegie's Lifetime Plan for Success. Hopefully you're joining me right after the introduction for a 30-day miracle morning. I'm gonna start halfway through this book, which is the second book in this two-parter. It is on how to stop worrying. And I wish I read this while I was doing my miracle morning. And so now I'm reading this retroactively, but you're hopefully not. You're doing this along with the 30 days. And I think this is a good way to finally limit yourself from experiencing so much anxiety. All right, so let's, without further ado, I'm gonna start. I don't have my microphone today. I ordered a new one on the old Amazon, so hopefully my audio will be better in the next 20 pages. So for today, we're gonna start with the preface, how this book was written and why, and you have to deal with this default iPhone mic. Okay, preface. How this book was written and why. In 1909, I was one of the unhappiest lads in New York. I was selling motor trucks for a living. I didn't know what made a motor truck run, and that wasn't all. I didn't want to know. I despised my job. I despised living in a cheap furnished room on the West 56th Street, a room infested with cockroaches. I still remember that I had a bunch of neckties hanging on the walls. And when I reached out of a morning to get a fresh necktie, the cockroaches scattered in all directions. I despised having to eat in cheap, dirty restaurants that were also probably infested with cockroaches. I came home to my lonely room each night with a sick headache, a headache bred and fed by disappointment, worry, bitterness, and rebellion. I was rebelling because the dreams I had nourished back in my college days had turned into nightmares. Was this life? Was this the vital adventure to which I had looked forward so eagerly? Was this all life would ever mean to me? Working hard at a job I despised, living with cockroaches, eating vile food, and with no hope for the future. I longed for leisure to read and to write the books I had dreamed of writing back in my college days. I knew I had everything to gain and nothing to lose by giving up the job I despised. I wasn't interested in making a lot of money, but I was interested in making a lot of living. In short, I'd come to the Rubicon, to the moment of decision which faces most young people when they start out in life. So I made my decision, and that decision completely altered my future. It has made the rest of my life happy and rewarding beyond my most utopian aspirations. My decision was this. I would give up the work I loathed, and since I had spent 4 years studying in the State Teachers College at Warrensburg, Missouri, preparing to teach, I would make a living teaching adult classes in night schools. Then I would have my days free to read books, prepare lectures, write novels, and short stories. I wanted to live to write and write to live. What subject should I teach to adults at night? As I looked back and evaluated my own college training, I saw that the training experience I had in public speaking had become more practical value to me in business and in life than everything else I had studied in college all put together. Why? Because it had wiped out my timidity and lack of self-confidence and given me the courage and assurance to deal with people. It also made clear that leadership usually gravitates to the man who can get up and say what he thinks. I applied for a position teaching public speaking in the night extension courses at both Columbia University and New York University, but these colleges decided they could struggle along somehow without my help. I was disappointed then, but I now thank God that they did turn me down, because I started teaching in YMCA night schools where I had to show concrete results and show them quickly. What a challenge that was. These adults didn't come to my classes because they wanted college credits or social prestige. They came for one reason only, and they wanted to solve their problems. They wanted to be able to stand up on their feet and say a few words at a business meeting without fainting from fright. Salesmen wanted to be able to call on a tough customer without having to walk around the block 3 times to get up the courage. They wanted to develop poise and self-confidence. They wanted to get ahead in business. They wanted to have more money for their families. And since they were paying their tuition on an installment basis, and they stopped paying if they didn't get results, and since I was being paid not a salary but a percentage of the profits, I had to be practical if I wanted to eat. I felt at the time that I was teaching under a handicap, but now I realized that I was getting priceless training. I had to motivate my students. I had to help them solve their problems. I had to make each session so inspiring that they wanted to continue coming. It was exciting work. I loved it. I was astounded at how quickly these businessmen developed self-confidence and how quickly many of them secured promotions and increased pay. The classes were succeeding far beyond my most optimistic hopes. Within 3 seasons, the YMCAs, which had refused to pay me $5 a night in salary, were paying me $30 a night on a percentage basis. At first, I taught only public speaking, but as the years went by, I saw that these adults also needed the ability to win friends and influence people. Since I couldn't find an adequate textbook on human relations, I wrote one myself. It was written, no, it wasn't written in the usual way. It grew and evolved out of the experience of the adults in these classes. I called it How to Win Friends and Influence People. And that's the first book in this. But I decided to start with the worrying part first because let's get through that section first and inspire us and give us the discipline needed to stop worrying. And then when we read the first book in the series, it'll make a lot more sense as we adopt those in our lives and we put into practice once we stop worrying so much. All right. Since it was written solely as a textbook for my own adult classes, and since I had written 4 other books that no one had ever heard of, I never dreamed that it would have a large sale. I'm probably one of the most astonished authors now living. As the years went by, I realized that another one of the biggest problems of these adults was worry. A large majority of students were businessmen, executives, salesmen, engineers, accountants, a cross-section of all the trades and professions, and most of them had problems. There were women in these classes, businesswomen and housewives. They too had problems. Clearly what I needed was a textbook on how to conquer worry. So again, I tried to find one. I went out to New York's great public library at 5th Avenue and 42nd Street and discovered to my astonishment that this library had only 22 books listed under the title of Worry. I also noticed, to my amusement, that it had 189 books listed under Worms. Almost 9 times as many books about worms as worry. Astounding, isn't it? Since worry is one of the biggest problems facing mankind, you would think, wouldn't you, that every high school and college in the land would give a course on how to stop worrying. Yet, if there is even one course on the subject in any college in the land, I've never heard of it. So no wonder David Seabury said in his book, How to Worry Successfully, we come to maturity with as little preparation for the pressures of experience as a bookworm asked to do a ballet. The result, more than half of our hospital beds are occupied by people with nervous and emotional troubles. I looked all over these 22 books on worrying, reposing on the shelves of the New York Public Library. In addition, I purchased all the books on worry I could find, yet I couldn't discover even one that I could use as a text in my course for adults. So I resolved to write one myself. I began preparing myself to write this book 7 years ago. How? By reading what the philosophers of all ages have said about worry. I also read hundreds of biographies, all the way from Confucius to Churchill. I also interviewed scores of prominent people in many walks of life, such as Jack Dempsey, General Omar Bradley, General Mark Clark. Okay, this will date this book. But don't worry, everything is still super relevant. Henry Ford, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Dorothy Dix. But that was only a beginning. I also did something else that was far more important than interviews and the reading. I worked for 5 years in a laboratory for conquering worry, a laboratory conducted in our own adult classes. As far as I know, it was the first and only laboratory of its kind in the world. This is what we did. We gave students a set of rules on how to stop worrying and asked them to apply these rules in their own lives and then talk to the class on the results they had obtained. Others reported on techniques they had used in the past. As a result of this experience, I presumed I have listened to more talks on how to conquer worry than any other individual who had walked on this earth. In addition, I read hundreds of other talks on how to conquer worry, talks that were sent to me by mail, talks that had won prizes in our classes that are held throughout the world. So this book didn't come out of an ivory tower. Neither it is an academic preachment on how worry might be conquered. Instead, I've tried to write a fast-moving, concise, documented report on how worry has been conquered by thousands of adults. One thing is certain, this book is practical. You can sink your, he says, set your teeth in it. Science, as the French philosopher Valéry said, is a collection of successful recipes. That is what this book is, a collection of successful and time-tested recipes to rid our lives of worry. However, let me warn you, you won't find anything new in it, but you will find much that is not generally applied. And when it comes to that, you and I don't need to be told anything new. We already know enough to lead perfect lives. We have already read the Golden Rule and the Sermon on the Mount. Our trouble is not ignorance, but inaction. The purpose of the book is to restate, illustrate, streamline, air condition, and glorify a lot of the ancient and basic truths and kick you in the shins and make you do something about applying them. You didn't pick up this book to read on how it was written. You are looking for action. All right, let's go. Please read part 1 and part 2 of this book. And if by that time you don't feel like you've acquired a new power and a new inspiration to stop, worry, and enjoy life, then toss this book away. It is no good for you. Okay. Next little bit here. 9 suggestions on how to get the most out of this book. And of course, one of the suggestions is to actually buy this book, right into it. And I think he'll talk about, how to essentially digest a book. I found most of these self-help books, especially the older ones, require several readings. Like I'm reading the Napoleon Hill book right now, and on the second read through, it's much more illuminating because the first time you go through it, it's a very bird's eye view, like everything is new and you don't know quite what to focus on or what to expect. And the second time through, you're like, oh, this part is really important. And you slow down and you think about it a little bit more and start to digest it rather than you're kind of wondering, is this important? Is this important? It's like, okay, just go through it once. Go through this once, let me read it to you, and then buy it, and then, the author's dead, he's not gonna get your money, right? This is just for you to help improve your life. And then reread it a second time, because I know you'll find things that I, kind of read over, but it didn't strike you as something important until you read it yourself. Okay, that's my little tidbit. Let's get into the 9 suggestions how to get the most out of this book. Number 1, if you wish to get the most out of this book, there is one indispensable requirement, one essential, infinitely more important than any rules or techniques. Unless you have this one fundamental requisite, 1,000 rules on how to study will avail little. And if you do have this cardinal endowment, then you can achieve wonders without reading any suggestions for getting the most out of this book. What is this magic requirement? Just this. A deep, driving desire to learn, a vigorous determination to stop worrying and to start living. And how do you know if you have that? Well, if you wake up or you spend your entire day with something in the pit of your stomach and it doesn't seem to go away no matter what you do, and you start getting short-tempered and everything that goes along with that, this book is for you. And yeah, if you don't have worry in your life, you probably won't get anything out of this book. But the reason you probably clicked on this was because you do have worry, and so you've come to the right place. Sorry about the toddler making noise. Again, the mic will help the next time cut out all the background noise. Boy, that is distracting, isn't it? How can you develop such an urge? By constantly reminding yourself on how important these principles are to you. Picture to yourself how their master will aid you in living a richer, happier life. Say to yourself over and over, My peace of mind, my happiness, my health, and perhaps even my income will, in the long run, depend largely on applying the old, obvious, and eternal truths taught in this book. My recommendation is, if you're young and don't have kids, focus everything you can on developing yourself and getting ahead in life. It is very distracting to have children. They will completely absorb your whole day, and you're like, okay, what happened to my day? I didn't do anything productive. Well, yeah, kids are a lot of work and attention. I feel really bad for any single parents out there. Well, that's why I'm also doing this. It means if you're driving or doing something where you're chauffeuring your kids around, you can listen to this and get ahead in life without having to worry about getting left behind. So, again, I feel your pain. Okay. 2, read each chapter rapidly at first to get a bird's eye view of it. You will probably be tempted to then rush ahead on the next one, but don't, unless you're reading merely for entertainment. But if you're reading because you want to stop worrying and start living, then go back and reread each chapter thoroughly. In the long run, this will mean saving time and getting results. 3, stop frequently in your reading to think over what you're reading. I've only read the first chapter in this book, so I might pause while I'm reading it because I'm reading for myself as well as for you. So maybe the parts that I stop at, we can have kind of an internal dialogue going on together with it. That kind of reading will aid you far more than racing ahead like a whippet chasing a rabbit. Number 4, reading with a red crayon, pencil, or pen in your hand. And when you come across a suggestion you feel you can use, draw a line beside it. With a 4-star suggestion, then underscore every sentence or mark it with an XXXX. Marking and underscoring a book will make it more interesting and far easier to review rapidly. I hope you don't hear that too loud. 5, I know a woman who has been office manager for a large insurance concern for 15 years. She reads every month all the insurance contracts her company issues. Yes, she reads the same contracts over and over, month after month, year after year. Why? Because experience has taught her that the only way she can keep their provisions clearly in mind that's the only way she can keep their provisions clearly in mind. I have once spent almost 2 years writing a book on public speaking, and yet I have to keep going back over it from time to time in order to remember everything I wrote in my own book. The rapidity with which we forget is astonishing. So if you want to get a real lasting benefit out of this book, don't imagine that skimming through it will... skimming, right? I was on skimming. After reading it thoroughly, you ought to spend a few hours reviewing it every month. Keep it on your desk in front of you every day. Glance through it often. Keep constantly impressing yourself with the rich possibilities for improvement that still lie in the offing. Remember that the use of these principles can be made habitual and unconscious only by a constant and vigorous campaign of review and application. There is no other way. Sorry, that's my camera. Sorry about that. Where was I? Number 6. Bernard Shaw once remarked, if you teach a man anything, he will never learn. Shaw was right. Learning is an active process. We learn by doing. So if you desire to master the principles you're studying in this book, do something about them. Apply these rules at every opportunity. If you don't, you'll forget them quickly. Only knowledge that is used sticks in your mind. You'll probably find it difficult to apply these suggestions all the time. I know because I wrote this book, and yet frequently I find it difficult to apply everything I've advocated for here. So as you read this book, remember that you are not merely trying to acquire information. You're attempting to form new habits. Yes, you're attempting a new way of life that will require time, persistence, and daily application. So refer to these pages often. Regard this as a working handbook on conquering worry. And when you are confronted with something, some trying problem, don't get all stirred up. Don't do the natural thing, the impulsive thing. That is usually wrong. Instead, turn to these pages and review the paragraphs you have underscored. Then try these new ways and watch them achieve magic for you. Offer your family members a quarter every time they catch you violating one of these principles advocated in this book. They will break you. Okay, maybe more than a quarter. Please turn to pages 428 and 429 of this book and read how Wall Street banker H.P. Howell and old Ben Franklin corrected their mistakes. Why don't you use the Howell and Franklin techniques to check up on your own application of these principles discussed in the book? If you do, two things will result. First, you will find yourself engaged in an educational process that is both intriguing and priceless. And second, you will find that your ability to stop worrying and start living will grow and spread like a green and bayed tree. Number 9, keep a diary. And this comes back to Miracle Mornings, keeping a diary or keeping a journal. A diary in which you ought to record your triumphs in the application of these principles. Be specific, give names, dates, and results. Keeping such a record will inspire you to greater efforts, and how fascinating these entries will be once you chance upon them some evening years from now. Okay, that is that. So I think that was 20 minutes. So part 1, I'm going to start tomorrow. It's going to be immediate for you, but then we're going to go through this book 20 minutes at a time, and hopefully that'll be exciting for you. So I'm going to tie this one with chapter 1, and then you'll find each chapter in its own individual episode on YouTube. Chapter 1, Live in Day-Tight Compartments. In the spring of 1871, a young man picked up a book and read 21 words that had a profound effect on his future. A medical student at the Montreal General Hospital, he was worried about passing the final examination. Worried about what to do, where to go, how to build up a practice, and how to make a living. The 21 words that this young medical student read in 1871 helped him become the world's most famous physician of his generation. He organized the world-famous Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. He became a Regius Professor of Medicine at Oxford, the highest honor that can be bestowed upon any medical man in the British Empire. He was knighted by the King of England, and when he died, 2 huge volumes containing 1,466 pages were required to tell the story of his life. His name was Sir William Osler. Here are the 21 words that he read in the spring of 1871. 21 words from Thomas Carlyle that helped him lead a life free from worry. Our main business is not to see what lies dimly at a distance, but to do what lies clearly at hand. 42 years later, on a soft spring night when the tulips were blooming on campus, this man, Sir William Osler, addressed the students of the Yale University. He told those Yale students that a man like himself, who had been a professor in 4 universities and had written a popular book, was supposed to have brains of a special quality. He declared that this was untrue. He said that his intimate friends knew that his brains were of the most mediocre character. What, then, was the secret to his success? He stated that it was owing to what he lived a life called living in day-tight compartments. What did he mean by that? A few months before he spoke at Yale, Sir William Osler had crossed the Atlantic on a great ocean liner, where the captain standing on the bridge could press a button, and presto, there was a clanging of machinery, and various parts of the ships was immediately shut off from one another, shut off into watertight compartments. Quote, "Now each one of you," Dr. Osler said to those Yale students, "is much more marvelous organization than that great liner, and bound on a longer voyage. What I urge is that you so learn to control the machinery as to live with day-tight compartments as the most certain way to ensure safety on the voyage. Get on a bridge and see that at least the great bulkheads are in working order. Touch a button and hear, at every level of your life, the iron doors shutting out the past, the dead yesterdays. Touch another and shut off with metal curtains the future, the unbound tomorrows. Then you're safe for today. Shut off the past, let the dead bury its dead. Shut out yesterdays which have lighted fools the way to a dusty death. The load of tomorrow, added to that of yesterday, carried today, makes the strongest falter. Shut off the future as tightly as the past. The future is today. There is no tomorrow. The day of man's salvation is now. Waste of energy, mental distress, nervous worries dog the steps of a man who is anxious about the future. Shut close, then, the great fore and aft bulkheads, and prepare to cultivate the habit of a life of day-tight compartments. Did Dr. Oslo mean to say that we should not make any effort to prepare for tomorrow? No, not at all. But he did go on in that address to say that the best possible way to prepare for tomorrow is to concentrate with all your intelligence and all your enthusiasm on today's work, on doing today's work superbly today. That is the only possible way you can prepare for the future. Sir William Osler urged the students at Yale to begin the day with Christ's prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. Remember that the prayer asks only for today's bread. It doesn't complain about the stale bread we had eaten yesterday, and it doesn't say, "Oh God, it has been pretty dry out in the wheat belt lately, and we may have another drought. And then how will we get bread to eat next fall? Or suppose I lose my job. Oh God, how could I get bread then?" No, this prayer teaches us to ask for today's bread only. Today's bread is the only kind of bread you can possibly eat. Years ago, a penniless philosopher was wandering through a stony country where the people had a hard time making a living. One day, a crowd gathered about him on a hill, and he gave what is probably the most quoted speech ever delivered anywhere at any time. This speech contains 26 words that have gone ringing down across the centuries. Quote, "Take therefore no thought for the morrow shall take thought for things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is that the evil thereof." Many men have rejected those words of Jesus. Quote, "Take no thought for the morrow." They have rejected these words as a counsel to perfectionism, as a bit of mysticism. Quote, "I must take thought for the morrow." They say, "I must take out insurance to protect my family. I must lay aside money for my old age. I must plan and prepare to get ahead." Right, of course you must. The truth is that those words of Jesus, translated over 300 years ago, don't mean today what they meant during the reign of King James. 300 years ago, the word thought frequently meant anxiety. Modern versions of the Bible quote Jesus more accurately as saying, "Have no anxiety for the tomorrow." By all means, take thought for the tomorrow. Yes, careful thought and planning and preparation, but have no anxiety. During the Second World War, our military leaders planned for the tomorrow, but they could not afford to have anxiety. Quote, "I have supplied the best men with the best equipment we have," said Admiral Ernest J. King, who directed the United States Navy. Quote, "and have given them what seems to be the wisest mission. That is all I can do. If a ship has been sunk," Admiral King went on, "I can't bring it up. If it is going to be sunk, I can't stop it. I can use my time much better working on tomorrow's problem than fretting about yesterday's. Besides, if I let those things get to me, I wouldn't last long." Whether in war or peace, the chief difference between good thinking and bad thinking is this. Good thinking deals with causes and effects and leads to logical, constructive planning. Bad thinking frequently leads to tension and nervous breakdowns. I had the privilege of interviewing author Hayes Sulzberger, publisher between 1935 and 1961 of the most famous newspaper in the world. the New York Times. Mr. Sulzberger told me that when the Second World War flamed across Europe, he was so stunned and so worried about the future that he found it almost impossible to sleep. He would frequently get out of bed in the middle of the night, take some canvas and tubes of paint, look in the mirror, and try to paint a portrait of himself. He didn't know anything about painting, but he painted anyway. To get his mind off his worries, Mr. Sulzberger told me that he was never able to banish his worries and find peace until he had adopted as his motto 5 words from a church hymn. One step enough for me. Lead, kindly light. Keep thou my feet, I do not ask to see the distance seen. One step enough for me. At about the same time, a young man in uniform somewhere in Europe was learning the same lesson. His name was Ted Bengaramino of Baltimore, Maryland, and he'd worked himself into a first-class case of combat fatigue. In April 1945, wrote Ted Ben, I had worried until I had developed what doctors called a spasmodic transverse colon, a condition that produced intense pain. If the war hadn't ended when it did, I'm sure I would have had a complete physical breakdown. I was utterly exhausted. I was at a Graves resignation, a non-commissioned officer for the 94th Infantry Division. My work was to help set up and maintain records of all the men killed in action, missing in action, and hospitalized. I also had to help disinter the bodies of both Allied and enemy soldiers who had been killed and hastily buried in shallow graves during the pitch of battle. I had to gather up the personal effects of these men and see that they were sent back to parents or closest relatives who would prize these personal effects so much. I was constantly worried for fear we might be making embarrassing and serious mistakes. I was worried about whether or not I would come through all of this. I was worried about whether I would live to hold my only child in my arms, a son of 16 months, whom I had never seen. I was so worried and exhausted that I lost 34 pounds. I was so frantic that I almost went out of mind. I looked at my hands. They were hardly more than skin and bones. I was terrified at the thought of going home a physical wreck. I broke down and sobbed like a child. I was so shaken that tears welled up every time I was alone. There was one period soon after the Battle of the Bulge started that I wept so often that I almost gave up hope of ever being a normal human being again. Battle of the Bulge, sorry about that. I messed that one up. I ended up in an army dispensary. Hey. Bulga. I'm just gonna cut that out. I don't want to sound like an idiot. There was one period soon after the Battle of the Bulga started that I wept so often that I almost gave up hope of ever being a normal human being again. I ended up in an army dispensary. An army doctor gave me some advice, which has completely changed my life. After giving me a thorough physical examination, he informed me that my troubles were mental. Ted, he said, I want you to think of your life as an hourglass. You know that there are thousands of grains of sand in the top of the hourglass, and they all pass slowly and evenly through the narrow neck in the middle. Nothing you or I could do would make more than one grain of sand pass through this narrow neck without impairing the hourglass. You and I and everyone else are like this hourglass. When we start in the morning, there are hundreds of tasks which we feel that we must accomplish that day. But if we do not take them one at a time and let them pass through the day slowly and evenly, as do the grains of sand passing through the narrow neck of the hourglass, then we are bound to break our own physical and mental structure. I have practiced that philosophy ever since that memorable day that an army doctor gave it to me. One grain of sand at a time, one task at a time. That advice saved me physically and mentally during the war, and it had also helped me in the present position of public relations and advertising director for the Ad Crafters print and offset company. I found the same problem rising in business that had arisen during the war. A score of things that had to be done at once, and there was little time to do them. We were low in stocks. We had new forms to handle, new stock arrangements, changes of address, opening and closing offices, and so on. Instead of getting taut and nervous, I remember what the doctor had told me. One grain of sand at a time, one task at a time. By repeating those words to myself over and over, I accomplished my tasks in a more efficient manner, and I did my work without the confusion and jumble of feeling that almost wrecked me on the battlefield. One of the most appalling comments on our present way of life is that at one time, half of all beds in our hospitals were reserved for patients with nervous and mental troubles. Patients who had collapsed under the crushing burden of accumulated yesterdays and fearful tomorrows. Yet a vast majority of these people could have avoided those hospitals, could have led happy, useful lives, if they'd only heeded the words of Jesus. Have no anxiety about the morrow, or the words of Sir William Osler. Live in day-tight compartments. You and I are standing this very second at a meeting place of two eternities. The vast past that has endured forever, and the future that is plunging onto the last syllable of recorded time. We cannot possibly live in either of those eternities. No, not even for one split second. But by trying to do so, we can wreck both our bodies and our minds. So let's be content to live the only time we can possibly live, from now until bedtime. Quote, anyone can carry his burden, however hard, until nightfall, wrote Robert Louis Stevenson. Quote, anyone can do his work, however hard, for one day. Anyone can live sweetly, patiently, lovingly, purely till the sun goes down. And this is all that life really means. Yes, that is all that life requires from us, but Mrs. E.K. Shields of Saginaw, Michigan, was driven to despair, even to the brink of suicide, before she learned to live just till bedtime. Quote, in 1937, I lost my husband, Mrs. Shields said as she told me her story. I was very much depressed and almost penniless. I wrote my former employer, Mr. Leon Roach, of the Roach Fowler Company of Kansas City, and got my old job back. I had formerly made my living selling world books to rural and town school boards. I had sold my car 2 years previously when my husband became ill, but I managed to scrape together enough money to put down a down payment on a used car and start out to sell books again. I had thought that getting back on the road would help me relieve my depression, but driving alone and eating alone was almost more than I could take. Some of the territory was not very productive, and I found it hard to make those car payments, small as they were. In the spring of 1938, I was working out of Versailles, Missouri. The schools were poor, the roads were bad. I was so lonely and discouraged that at one time I even considered suicide. It seemed that success was impossible. I had nothing to live for. I dreaded getting up each morning and facing life. I was afraid of everything. Afraid I could not meet the car payments. Afraid I could not pay my room rent. Afraid I would not have enough money to eat. I was afraid my health was failing and I had no money for a doctor. All that kept me from suicide were the thoughts that my sister would be deeply grieved and that I did not have enough money to pay for my own funeral expenses. Then one day I read an article that lifted me out of my despondence and gave me the courage to go on living. I shall never cease to be grateful for one inspiring sentence in that article. It said, quote, every day is a new life to a wise man. I typed that sentence out and pasted it on the windshield of my car, where I saw it every minute I was driving. I found it wasn't so hard to live only one day at a time. I learned to forget the yesterdays and to not think of the tomorrows. Each morning I said to myself, today
is a new life. I've succeeded in overcoming my fear of loneliness, my fear of want. I'm happy and fairly successful now and have a lot of enthusiasm and love for life. I now know that I shall never be afraid again, regardless of what life hands me. I know now that I don't have to fear the future. I now know that I can live one day at a time, and that every day is a new life to a wise man. Who do you think, suppose, wrote this verse? Happy the man, and happy he alone, he who can call today his own, he who, secure within, can say, tomorrow do thy worst, for I have lived today. Those words sound modern, don't they? Yet they were written 30 years before Christ was born by the Roman poet Horace. One of the most tragic things I know about human nature is that all of us tend to put off living. We're all dreaming about some magical rose garden over the horizon instead of enjoying the roses that are blooming outside the window today. Why are we such fools, such tragic fools? How strange is it that our little possession of life, wrote Stephen Leacock. The child says, when I am a big boy, but what is that? The big boy says, when I grow up. And then the grown-up says, when I get married. But to be married, what is that after all? The thought changes to when I'm able to retire. And then when retirement comes, he looks back over the landscape traversed. A cold wind seems to sweep over it. Somehow he missed it all, and it is gone. Life, we learn too late, is living in the tissue of every day and hour. The late Edward S. Stevens of Detroit almost killed himself with worry before he learnt that life is, quote, is in the living, in the tissue of every day and hour. Brought up in poverty, Edward Evans made his first money by selling newspapers and worked as a grocer's clerk. Later, with 7 people dependent on him for bread and butter, he got a job as an assistant librarian. Small as the pay was, he was afraid to quit. 8 years passed before he could summon up the courage to start out on his own. But once he started, he built up an original investment of 55 borrowed dollars into a business of his own that made him $20,000 a year. Then came a frost, a killing frost. He endorsed a big note for a friend, and then the friend went bankrupt. Quickly, on top of that disaster came another. The bank in which he had all his money collapsed. He had not only lost every cent he had, but was also plunged in debt for $16,000. His nerves couldn't take it. I couldn't sleep or eat, he told me. I became severely ill. Worrying and nothing but worry, he said, brought on this illness. One day I was walking down the street and I fainted and fell on the sidewalk. I was no longer able to walk. I was put to bed and my body broke out in boils. These boils turned inward until just lying in bed was agony. I grew weaker every day. Finally, my doctor told me that I only had 2 more weeks to live. I was shocked. I drew up my will and then lay back in bed to await my end. No use now to struggle or worry. I gave up, relaxed, and went to sleep. I hadn't slept 2 hours in succession for weeks, but now, with my earthly problems drawing to an end, I slept like a baby. My exhausting weariness began to disappear. My appetite returned. I gained weight. A few weeks later, I was able to walk with crutches. 6 weeks later, I was able to go back to work. I've been making $20,000 a year, but I was glad now to get a job for $30 a week. I got a job selling blocks to put behind the wheels of automobiles when they're shipped by freight. I learned my lesson now. No more worry for me. No more regret about what happened in the past. No more dread of the future. I concentrated all my time, energy, and enthusiasm in selling those blocks. Edward S. Evans shot up fast now. In a few years, he was president of the company, the Evans Products Company. It had been listed on the New York Stock Exchange for years. If you ever fly over Greenland, you may land on Evans Field, a flying field named in his honor. Yet Edward S. Evans never would have achieved these victories if he hadn't learned to live in day-tight compartments. You will recall that the White Queen said, quote, "The rule is jam tomorrow and jam yesterday, but never jam today." Most of us are like that, stewing about yesterday's jam and worrying about tomorrow's jam, instead of spreading today's jam thick on our bread right now. Even the great French philosopher Montaigne, let's just go with that, made that mistake. "My life," he said, "has been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened. So has mine, and so has yours." "Think," said Dante, "that this day will never dawn again. Life is slipping away with incredible speed. We are racing through space at the rate of 19 miles per second. Today is our most precious possession. It is our only sure possession." That is the philosophy of Lowell Thomas. I recently spent a weekend at his farm, and I noticed he had these words from Psalm CV, I don't know how to read this, 2000 something, CXVIII, framed and hanging on the walls of his broadcasting studio where he would see them often, and said, "This is the day which the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it." The writer John Ruskin had on his desk a simple piece of stone on which was carved one word: today. And while I haven't a piece of stone on my desk, I do have a poem pasted on my mirror where I can see it when I shave every morning. A poem that Sir William Osler always kept on his desk. A poem written by a famous Indian dramatist, Kalidasa. And it goes like this. "Salutation to the dawn. Look to this day, for it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the verities and realities of your existence, the bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of beauty. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision. But today well lived makes every yesterday a dream of happiness, and every morrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. Such is the salutation to the dawn." So, the first thing you should, reminds me of the Kung Fu Panda in the first movie, when Oogway talks to the raccoon. Shifu, that's it. Let me see if I can answer that right now. So the first thing you should know about worry is this. If you want to keep it out of your life, do what Sir William Osler did. Number 1, shut the iron doors on the past and the future. Live in day-tight compartments. Why not ask yourself these questions and write down the answers? Okay, here's some 5 questions. You can write down the answers. A little heads up here, and then that's the end of chapter 1. Number 1, do I tend to put off living in the present in order to worry about the future, or yearn for some magical rose garden over the horizon? Yeah. Always, I'll be successful and prosperous. And you always wait for that time that you're successful and prosperous, but you know, we all have moving targets. You know, my life right now is success for one person, and for me it's not success. I want to keep moving, and the goalposts keep moving. So that's why even if you are successful, like truly successful, you still might, like Tony Robbins talks about this all the time, like there's billionaires that aren't happy with their life, even though they're, by our terms, very successful, but they never live in the present, I guess. And they always want to have that magical rose garden over the horizon. Number 2, do I sometimes embitter the present by regretting things that happened in the past that are over and done with? I mean, of course, I think everybody kind of has that thing about laying awake at night and thinking about, oh man, it was so embarrassing, why did I do that? I mean, of course, I look at my life, but I also like that, you know, I regret spending so much time wasting it at school, going to college and all that crap, but I wouldn't be here at this point right now if I didn't go through 4 years, no, that's 4 years of undergrad and another 4 years of master's degree. I wouldn't be here right now if I didn't go through all that. If I just kind of went at it at my own right out of high school, I wouldn't be here definitely. So we are all meant to be where we are right now in order to learn and grow, just as that miracle morning affirmation goes, right? So finding that inner peace with where we are right now, and we're meant to be here so we can learn to go where we need to be. 3, do I get up in the morning determined to seize the day, to get the utmost out of these 24 hours? And that's again the miracle morning, right? Your day is your life, and if you sleep in and all that, what it says in the affirmations, like everything depends on you living your day, your relationships, your success, your finances, your career, and everything gets based on your waking hours. And the more you sleep, the worse your everything will be in life, right? So that's the whole point of waking up, getting up. It sets the entire tone for your day. You know, working out, getting the energy, and then all of a sudden you're going to explode in your day. You know, seize the day instead of just waking up, hitting the snooze button a couple times, and then begrudgingly getting in your car and going to work. 4, can I get more out of life by living in day-tight compartments? Yeah, again, this is very germane to the miracle morning, is you need to take the actions today to get where you need to be, right? It's about doing the things today and not worrying about, oh, I need to do all this stuff tomorrow, and okay, how am I gonna make $1 million a year? It's like, don't worry about that stuff. What do you need to do today to get to your goal, right? We have the big goal in mind, and then we break them down, like what Tom Morris's success thing. If you haven't watched that, watch my Miracle Morning when I talk about how Tom Morris has his 7 conditions for success, and it's breaking down our big goal into manageable steps, and essentially you find your step. What can I do today to get where I need to go, and just focus on the results of that day. And as again from this book, he asks himself every day, every morning, and if he doesn't get to it, he says, okay, you know, I'm not going to complain about it. I'm just going to commit to doing it tomorrow, and that way I'm going to do it tomorrow, and then that's commitment to yourself, so you can stop worrying about it. Okay. 5, when shall I start to do this? Next week, tomorrow, today? Obviously today. I started the Miracle Morning on a random Tuesday in like the middle of October. It's like, I didn't wait until the end of the year. I didn't wait to January. I didn't wait for my New Year's resolution. I didn't wait to the 1st or the 31st. Just start today, okay? The sooner you start, the better. It's just like investing. It's like, it's compound interest. The sooner you start, the better. You don't have to wait until next year to invest, right? You know, if you have $100 and the stock market goes up on average 8%, why not have that $8? You can have $108 instead of just waiting and sitting in your hands until a year from now. So start now. Okay, that was it. Chapter 2 is the next video.